councillors and members of the public. Before we commence the meeting, I would like to draw your attention to the fire regulations, which are on the screen behind me and the small screen up there. Also, please can you ensure that your mobile phones are switched to silent, and councillors, can I please ask and remind you to speak directly into the microphone and make sure that your card is pushed firmly into the console. Members of the public, I'd like to welcome you here this evening and to say that as a committee we do understand that matters under consideration tonight may be emotive, but please be respectful of those around you in the public gallery and indeed the committee, and refrain from any applause, booing, cheering or any other form of disturbance. Thank you. Now we move to the main items of business, the minutes. The minutes of the meeting, which took place on the 10th of August 2016, have been on the table for the last 30 minutes. Are you content that I sign these as a correct record of that meeting? Really? Thank you. Apologies for absence. Have there been any apologies for absence, Gary?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, we've received apologies for absence from Councillor Brian Ellis, Councillor Simon Thornton and Councillor Dennis Lee. Councillors Peter Martin and Tom Martin and David Hunter appear to be late, but we are expecting them at some point.
Thank you, Gary. Have members declared any interest before the meeting?
Yes, Chairman. Yourself, Councillor David Else, has declared a pecuniary interest in planning item B2, WA 2016-1388, 7 Richmond Road, Godalming, as he is the agent. As a result, Councillor Else will leave the room prior to consideration of item B2, and therefore the committee needs to agree a chairman to consider that item when we get to it. And I think you would like to nominate somebody, Councillor Else.
Yes, thank you, Gary. I'd like to nominate Councillor Tom Martin, who is due to arrive any time now, I think, to act as chairman for consideration of item B2. There he is. What excellent timing. Thank you. Committee, do I have your agreement? Agreed. Thank you, that is agreed. Do members have any other non-pecuniary or disclosable pecuniary interest to declare? Jolly good. Okay, item 4. Have there been any questions received from members of the public, Gary?
None received, Chairman.
Jolly good. Are there any updates to government guidance or legislation that the committee should be aware of, Peter?
Thank you, Chairman. No updates today.
Jolly good. So we move on to the applications for planning permission. In the event of site inspections being necessary as a result of consideration of the applications at this meeting, these will be held on Monday the 3rd of October 2016 at a time to be agreed. Now, before we move on to the planning applications, I believe that Peter would like to update us on the importance of the local plan. Peter.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, this is a general update on two of the matters, two of the items on the agenda, B1 and B2. So I'll just have one update regarding the heading which relates to development plan policies and proposals, and that is specifically on pages 99 and 137 of your agenda. You'll notice that relates to or relevant policies and weight to be afforded to the current local plan and the emerging local plan. So it's just a revised paragraph which I'll read out if that's okay, and it relates to the emerging local plan, as I said. And so it should read: the Council is in the process of replacing the adopted 2002 local plan with a new two-part document. Part 1, Strategic Policies and Sites, will replace the core strategy that was withdrawn in October 2013. Part 2, Non-Strategic Policies and Sites, will follow the adoption of Part 1. The new local plan builds on the foundations of the core strategy, particularly in those areas where the policy or approach is not likely to change significantly. On the 19th of July 2016, the Council approved the publication of the draft local plan, Part 1, for its pre-submission consultation under Regulation 19 of the Town and Country Planning Regulations 2012. In accordance with paragraph 216 of the NPPF, weight can be given to the draft plan, but the degree to which it can is determined by the stage the plan has reached and the extent to which there are any unresolved objections to it. It is considered that significant weight can be given to the pre-submission plan following the pre-submission plan document publication on Friday the 19th of August, given its history of preparation thus far, the iterations of it and the extent of consultation and consideration on it to date. The weight afforded to the draft local plan will increase as the plan progresses throughout examination and onto its adoption in 2017. So just the key point, I've read the whole paragraph, but the key point to note is that significant weight can be given to that pre-submission document, and that has come as a result of evidence that has been given at the Waverley Lane public inquiry that has been adjourned for further consideration. Hopefully that's useful. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Peter. Right, moving on to the first application under consideration. This is item A1, reference WA 2016-0701, Hindhead Hill Farm, Bedford Lane, Thursley, GU 68NN. Jennifer, would you like to introduce the application to the committee, please?
Thank you, Chairman. This application is for the erection of a storage building incorporating solar panels, including office and welfare facilities, together with ancillary works to provide road salt storage, following the demolition of existing buildings and structures. So this plan shows the location of the site. The site is accessed off Bedford Lane, with the A3 to the west, residential dwellings and a farm to the east and northeast, and open fields to the south. The satellite image here shows the route from the site to the A3. So this is the route, the site here, and the route with the northbound entrance and then the southbound entrance to the A3 there. And on this plan, the public bridleway that runs adjacent to the site starts here and then carries on down here. This is the existing site plan. So the areas marked in red show the existing buildings which are proposed for demolition. This here is the existing and the proposed access point. And then this is the existing agricultural dwelling which is outside of the site boundary. And this is just a satellite image showing the existing buildings proposed for demolition here. So this is the block plan. As said before, the application seeks permission for the erection of a building to store salt for the purposes of gritting the A3 from the junction of the A27 and the A3M to the junction of the M25 and A3. The building would include two areas for the storage of brown salt, an area for the storage of white salt, an area for storing 4 gritter lorries, and a small site office. The site would be accessed from this access point, and the proposal would include an area of hard standing, shown hatched, parking, shown here, a drainage scheme that would include wetland cells, swales, and willow plantation. So these are photographs of the site. This is the access road, Bedford Lane, which the A3 is accessed up from down that way. So you come up here, round this corner, and then this is the access to the site, shown a little bit closer here, so that's the existing gates. These show the existing buildings on the site and the land to the front of those buildings, where the hard standing would be. This shows the agricultural dwelling, which wouldn't be included within the site boundary, and views towards that building, and then views towards the entrance. And the A3 runs along behind here. So the next slides are the existing and proposed elevations showing site sections. So we've got the west elevation here. The existing is the top image. The east elevation site sections. The proposed north and the existing north. And the south elevations and site sections. So this is the proposed floor plan, which shows here you've got the storage areas for the brown salt, the white salt, the gritter lorries with a washing facility, and then the site office to the rear here. And this is a photo visualization of the site, which doesn't include the proposed landscaping, which, were you to grant permission, we've recommended a condition to secure those details. But you can see the proposed building there. So before I move on to the determining issues, I turn your attention to the update sheet. The Surrey Wildlife Trust requested further information regarding the reptile mitigation measures, which the applicant provided in a letter on dated the 5th of September 2016. We received further comments from the Surrey Wildlife Trust since the update sheet was published with regard to that additional information, and they confirmed that they consider the likelihood of reptiles being harmed from this proposal has been significantly reduced due to that additional information they provided. So we therefore, officers therefore recommend that Condition 1 be amended to include the details identified within the letter dated the 5th of September 2016. Furthermore, additional representations have been summarised on the update sheet, which do not raise any further material considerations over those considered within the officer's report. And since the update sheet was published, an additional representation was received, which makes comment on the officer's report. The following new issues were raised. One of them related to signage outside of the development, which shouldn't be allowed to retain the rural setting of the area. Officer's response is that signage would require advertisement consent, so it would be controlled through that route. The second point that was raised was with regard to the equestrian signage, and comment that further signage should be conditioned at the northern start to Boundless Road where permission to be granted. In response to that, officers have followed the recommendations of the County Highway Authority, who require signage at the pinch point of the road at the underpass, and this is secured under Condition 9. And lastly, the representation makes additional comment about the design and appearance of entrance gates, which should maintain a consistent agricultural farm-style entrance. Officers have noted this representation and consider it would be reasonable to impose an additional condition on any permission granted to require drawings and details of the entrance gates prior to the commencement of development. So moving on to the matters of principal and technical opinion, the principle of development and the Greenbelt considerations are that the site is located within the Greenbelt outside the settlement boundary, and therefore the proposed development would amount to inappropriate development. Therefore, very special circumstances would be required to outweigh harm to the Greenbelt and any other harm. As you will have read in the officer report, the applicant submitted the following as their very special circumstances. Firstly, the provision of an outstation in this location would ensure a rapid response to providing winter maintenance activities and safeguard the travelling public using the A3. Secondly, the inclusion of an ecological treatment scheme. Thirdly, that the outstation would reduce Highways England carbon emissions in terms of travelling to and from the A3 from alternative sites. And fourth, that alternative existing sites do not present a viable or long-term option. The details of the alternative sites are described on pages 41 to 42 of the agenda. Officers have made a full assessment of the very special circumstances put forward, as set out on pages 42 to 44, and officers consider the applicant has demonstrated the need for the proposal and that the alternative existing sites would not be able to provide the required service within a comparable or acceptable distance from the strategic road network. However, the very special circumstances are a matter for councillors to consider this evening. The second matter of principal and technical opinion is the loss of agricultural land. Officers are satisfied, following consultation with the Council's agricultural consultant, that the remaining agricultural land, together with the agricultural dwelling, would be able to operate as a viable agricultural holding. As such, the proposal would be acceptable in this regard. Next is the impact on the bridleway and highway. With regard to the bridleway, the County Rights of Way officer has been consulted and raised no objection. As shown on the location plan earlier, the bridleway starts to the east of the access point, and therefore the vehicular traffic associated with this development would not directly affect the bridleway. The County Highway Authority have been consulted on the impact of the proposal on Bedford Lane and also raised no objection. Were permission to be granted, though, two conditions have been recommended. The first relates to the restriction of vehicular traffic to that identified within the transport statement, as summarised on pages 34 and 35 of the agenda. The second relates to the installation of advisory warning signs at the underpass to warn drivers of equestrian users. Further, a construction transport management plan has been recommended by condition. So the matters of judgment for councillors to consider this evening are the impact on visual amenity, including the AONB and AGLV. The site would be visible from the northbound carriageway of the A3, but would be screened by mature trees to the north and east. Officers consider the proposed building has been designed so that it would blend with the wooded backdrop with green-coloured elevational treatment and a low height. Whilst the proposal would result in some harm to the AONB, officers consider the proposal would not result in significant harm, and any harm would be outweighed by the need for this facility. In order to restrict the external lighting on the site, officers have recommended a condition be imposed on any permission restricting the lighting to motion sensitive only. Next is the impact on residential amenity. There are a group of residential dwellings to the northeast of the site. The Council's environmental health team have been consulted on this application and raised no objection with regard to the impact of the proposal on neighbouring residential amenities. On this note, officers have recommended a condition, were permission to be granted, to restrict the use of reverse beepers on lorries at the site. Further, as the application has been assessed on the proposed storage of salt for extreme winter weather conditions, officers recommend a condition that the salt be restricted in use to that of the proposal so that it may not be used for other storage purposes. And lastly, the assessment of very special circumstances, as I have discussed before. Officers therefore recommend granting of this application. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Jennifer. Now, this is a public speaking item. The procedure is detailed on the back of the laminated cards for those of you that have asked to speak, and I believe the procedure has been explained to you. May I first invite the opponent, Tony Kelly, to speak, please? Good evening, Mr. Kelly. You have 4 minutes from when you begin speaking.
So I'm Tony Kelly, a resident of Bedford Lane and Thursley. I'm going to try and convey the notes of our lawyer, Ben Garbett, 20 years legal planning experience, who was delayed on the line getting here today due to fatality. I'm also here to speak on behalf of the residents and neighbours and the 150 objectors to this application, including many users of the national assets that are the AONB and the Greenbelt. We strongly recommend that the members refuse this application. There are many objections that have been raised in the documentation. I don't propose to go through all of the detail touching on noise and light pollution, salt leaching and loss of amenity to residents and users of the Greensand Way and the AONB. I would rather focus on the key point, which is a vital issue, and that concerns the availability of other sites that are existing or alternative. It is not simply enough that Kier and Highways England say that a facility is needed. The members need to be convinced that a Greenbelt location is required to satisfy that need. We disagree fundamentally with the planning officer's assessment that very special circumstances have been proven sufficient to outweigh the harm to the Greenbelt. And we want to emphasise 2 points from national planning policy, that it is a requirement that substantial weight must be given to Greenbelt harm, and that this harm, such as the impact on the AONB, must be clearly outweighed by any other considerations. And this is undoubtedly a very high hurdle to clear, and so careful consideration must be made. Our concern is that alternative sites have not been properly scrutinised. The residents have put forward more than 4 options, and we feel that the report fails to consider them in suitable depth, and in some cases omits to consider them. Firstly, it's a matter of public information that Longmoor site, where the current salt is not under threat, and so there's no immediate urgency, and therefore other sites could be considered within the time frame. Secondly, we've obtained and submitted a Freedom of Information request which identifies, and in black and white in Highways England's own writing, states that there are alternative sites that they will revisit and fall back on if Waverley refuse. This has not been covered in the officer's report, and we feel this is a significant and major and critical flaw. Thirdly, the tunnel operations site has been identified as a possible location which has direct A3 access and far less impact on the AONB. And we've also pointed out that Parkgate, an existing salt depot, and Leatherhead, an existing salt depot in the north, and Leatherhead not being identified on Kier's map, all of which information is in the public domain, could be combined as a satisfactory combination of salting services on the A3 using Kier and Highways England's own gritting lorry movement data. Lastly, we've identified 2 privately owned sites, Forsyth Farm and Compton Nurseries, We've spoken to both of them. In the case of Forsyth Farm, they would welcome an approach, and it has an existing A3 access, and heavy vehicle usage is currently active. Refill refusal of this application will force Highways England and Kia to carry out work they should have already completed and ensure that the officer's report is completed, which we feel is completely flawed at the moment. In summary, we residents are massively disappointed by the planning process and feel let down. We've demonstrated alternatives that meet the needs of salting on the A3. We're not against salting, it's critical. But the planning report and the process so far has allowed Kia and Highways to ride roughshod over the AONB and the Greenbelt requirements because it's convenient that they own the site. It's also against their promise to the Secretary of State at the tunnel inquiry that they would restore it to a farm and sell it as a total agricultural unit. We urge you to refuse.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Excellent timing there. May I now invite Councillor Peter Hunter of Thursley Parish Council to speak. Good evening, Councillor Hunter. You have 4 minutes from when you begin speaking.
Thank you. Thursley Parish Council strongly object to this proposed development by Highways England in that it is contrary to the current development planning policy, as it is located within the Greenbelt, the Surrey Hills ANOB, an area of landscape value. Further, it is adjacent to 3 cultural heritage assets, is inconsistent with the Thursley Village Design Statement adopted by Waverley Council, will result in both noise and light pollution to residents on both sides of the A3. Access egress of such heavy goods vehicles would not be suitable and compatible with the use of the very minor road known as Bedford Lane, used by local residents, walkers, equestrians and herding cattle. Para 88 of the NPPF states that there must be very special circumstances before consent can be given to anything that will cause potential harm to the Greenbelt by reason of inappropriateness. We do not believe that very special circumstances have been demonstrated, as there are a number of other sites that, by Highways England's own rules, are suitable in terms of distance to the A3 trunk road. However, having said that, we fully understand why such a facility has to be close to the trunk road it is designed to serve. Just as we and the National Trust accepted 12 years ago that in order to facilitate the operation of the Hindhead Tunnel, it would be necessary to have a service and control centre building on land adjacent to the tunnel's north portal, which is within Thursley Parish. Having carried out a desktop survey and with specific local knowledge, we have determined that it would be possible to accommodate the described gritting facilities within the curtilage of the land comprising the Highway Service and Control Building. Not where Kia have said, but a little further north, to the north on relatively flat land. The advantages are obvious. It is an established trunk road operations centre under the control of Highways England. Not only is it less than a mile from the A3, it is directly on the A3. And though access egress works will be required to facilitate such, we cannot believe that that is beyond the expertise of Highways England's engineers and or their contractors. Indeed, they already have lane control facilities in place, and it just requires a button to be pressed. None of this would be visible to any party, resident or transit, other than from a helicopter. There is surely the added advantage that the administration and welfare facilities already exist. We cannot therefore concur that very special circumstances prevail, thus requiring consent. I can also confirm that in the event of such a proposal coming before Thursley Parish Council, it would vote to support it. I personally represented Thursley Parish Council at the Hindhead Tunnel public inquiry between September 2004 and 2005. And though not of direct concern to this committee and Waverley Planning Department, I am at pains to highlight that a firm commitment was made by the Highways Agency on behalf of the Secretary of State for Transport and Rural Affairs, and that at the end of the tunnel contract, the site of Hindhead Hill Farm would be restored to its original condition and disposed of as an agriculture unit. Section 334 of the Temporary Works Facilities of the Inspector's Report dated the 24th of August 2005 refers. I therefore urge the committee not to facilitate such a breach of covenant. The parish of Thursley wants its farm back in its entirety and does not want such a threat to its established farming environment.
Thank you, Councillor Hunter. Now may I invite the supporter, Edward Nichols, to speak. Good evening, Mr. Nichols. You have 4 minutes from when you begin speaking.
Good evening, Chairman, Councillors, ladies and gentlemen. I am Edward Nichols. I'm representing Highways England on their interest of this particular development that's been proposed. I won't obviously go through all the details. You've already seen the case file. We've met with the residents on a number of occasions. However, we need to urge the need for this particular development in order to undertake essential winter maintenance activities on the A3. We're currently operating from Longmoor, quite rightly, as Mr. Hunter and Mr. Kelly have mentioned. That particular site is under a temporary lease agreement with the MOD at present. Our current lease agreement does not allow us for any development or enhancement of those facilities at the moment. We have a lack of welfare and running utilities to service the requirements. Therefore, we've looked at other alternatives. My client has quite rightly spoken to residents via the Freedom of Information request, and they've presented other sites. However, they do not present a workable solution at this time. We therefore seek your permission to construct a small outstation. And I think the theme here is that it's meant to be a dormant station that's not used any other times outside of the winter period. The intentions are then to reduce and minimise impact on the neighbouring residents, etc., and cause minimal detrimental impact on the surrounding environment. You'll see from the plans that we've also included a living water system with the intentions of enhancing the neighbouring environment to anything that we do detrimentally impact on. The land will remain under agriculture use, as will the dwelling, and therefore Highways England believe they have maintained their condition to return the site back to agriculture use. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Nichols. And before I open this up to the members, I believe that Councillor Jenny Else, the Ward Councillor, would like to speak to this application. Councillor Else.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, this application concerns a development which is within my ward of Elstead, Thursley and Brook. And I believe it's a difficult one to make an objective judgment on. I realise that, like telecommunication masts, no one wants a salt depot on their doorstep. And yet, like telecommunication masts, they're essential to the infrastructure of our borough. I don't think anybody is denying that. With this in mind, I thoroughly recommend to this committee that they make a site visit in order to make an objective judgment, if they are minded to agree with officers, that is. With a large number of objections having been received from local residents, and as ward councillor, I am obviously extremely concerned that the objections to this proposal should have been given every consideration. And again, I say the only way I think that can be done is via a site visit. I'd just like to ask the officers a few questions. We've heard some very good representations, I think, to support the objections. The local residents have suggested various alternative sites in the area, including Forsyth's Farm at Hurtmoor, which is just a mile or so up the road, up the A3, and the nursery at Compton, both of which would meet the response time. They don't appear to have been considered by the applicant. Please correct me if I'm wrong. No consideration appears to be given in the report of the existing depot at Leatherhead, which could, in conjunction with an existing site in the south, meet the response times required. And given the nature of our area, it is very unlikely that an alternative site could be found locally that is not within the green belt. But is there not a suitable site that is not within the AONB? Have we examined that thoroughly? And if not, would one of the alternative sites suggested by residents be less intrusive in the countryside? It would not be so close to dwellings and farms, and not in an area heavily used for equestrian and walking purposes. I'm not convinced that the access to this proposed site, which is via a fairly tortuous, narrow, single-track road, is a suitable access for large trucks in inclement weather. So whilst it is fully appreciated by myself and I believe by the residents of this particular area that a salt depot is a very essential part of our infrastructure to keep everything going in times of bad weather, I question the wisdom of granting this application. And I'd like the answers to those questions, if I may, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Else. Officers, would you like to respond to those? Okay, Peter.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Else. So in terms of the availability of the sites, page 44 picks up on the table on your agenda on page 44. So firstly, looking at sites that are not within the applicant's ownership, the applicants have stated that they would obviously need they need to fund the cost of actually getting these sites. The applicant has stated that income generated from, say, the sale of Hindhead Hill Farm would not be sufficient to cover the costs of procuring an alternative site. They've discounted other ones on that basis that are not within their ownership. They've looked at ones that are available to them. So I think that sort of picks up on availability. On a specific point on ones that are in private ownership. The existing Hindhead tunnel compound, that's in your update as well. We've looked at that and considered that point. Bear with me 1 minute. Sorry, on the third page of your update and the second bullet point from the top there, with regards to the Hindhead Hill Tunnel site, this came out of the Freedom of Information request. While the plot is about 3,138 square metres, Highways England do not own or lease all of the land and therefore do not hold information about footprint of other structures on the site other than the service building, which measures 734 square metres. And the service building currently occupies 65% of the area that Highways England currently occupies. So therefore that sort of rules out that in terms of quantity of that site, and as I say, they've stated that they don't own that. Reference has been made to Forsyth Farm. Officers believe that that is subject to green belt constraint also, so that would be subject to similar considerations of the application site. And in terms of the access, of course it's come via Kia, the application, but it is of course Highways England that it's serving and serving that network. They obviously need to propose a suitable means of access, and they will be fully aware of what is appropriate as a highways mean of access to a site, and also the county council have considered it as the highway authority and found it to be acceptable as well. So from a highway safety point of view, whilst it is down a lane, it's a reasonably good width lane, tarmacked all the way from the A3 to the specific access to the site. Beyond the access to the site isn't, but there would be no need for any of the larger lorries to carry along there. I think that picks up on all the points raised, but if there's anything missed, please let me know. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Peter. Now open it up to the members. Councillor Wheatley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of questions. As has been said, this is a single carriageway would the developer be proposing to have some kind of overtaking place, even if it's just for the horses, so somewhere safe for them to go, and walkers indeed, they're going to be climbing fences. And it sounds as though it's half a mile from the A3. If by chance we get caught out with a heavy snowfall, well, it's a long windy lane anyway, would they be able to dig their way out?
Thank you. Councillor Peter Martin.
Thank you. I do understand the sensitivities of anything like this proposition in terms of lorries, and we often have to look at applications for utility things that are located close to people's homes. In my own county division in Whitley, we have a council-owned yard for salting the local roads, and that seems to operate fairly happily. I have to say, I don't see this as a big incursion into the AONB or into the green belt. It's located very close to what is already a noisy point, the A3, and the access road back and forth on either side of the A3 is relatively close to the A3, which itself is a point of noise. So I have to say, I look at this and feel that it's a relatively small incursion, and it's the provision of a very essential facility, namely the gritting of the road, and it's located right alongside the road that it has to serve. And what we are talking about are 4 lorries operating in the winter months when the temperature falls below or close to freezing. So on average, the number of days per year on which this will be used are relatively low. And whilst I understand the concerns, I have to say that taking everything into account, I think we have to look at the application that we've got in front of us, and I will be supporting the officers in their proposition to grant approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Councillor Holder.
Thank you, Chairman. I notice on page 43 that there is no immediate need to move the site from Longmoor at the moment, and in fact there's no pressure to relocate the site from Longmoor, and as Longmoor is a brownfield site and this is a greenfield site in the AONB and AGLB, I would have thought it's ideally suited to can remain at Longmoor and not to move it. I can't understand why we're considering this application. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Officers, would you like to respond to Councillor and also Councillor Wheatley's earlier point about the passing bay?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'll pick up on first comments from Councillor Wheatley. So the first question was on passing points along the access road. It is about a mile, so from the access gate to the A3, but there are existing passing points along that road, so they are available. In terms of concern about in inclement weather and snow, given the nature of the type of use, they are there to keep the roads clear, salt spreading. I would hope that they would be able to self-regulate that and ensure their vehicles can enter and exit, because they will be able to know when hopefully when there's likely to be ice or snowy conditions, so they can obviously keep their route clear, so they won't want to be blocked in. So officers consider that matter would be self-regulating, because the very nature of what they are actually doing along there is to maintain that access point. But it is an important point. In terms of the comment about Longmoor, I think on page 43 it is considered that there's no immediate pressure to relocate from that service, but it doesn't give the service provider that long-term security of that site. And if the Ministry of Defence do, for some reason, hopefully not, need that for operational services, they can serve relatively short notice to require them not to be able to use that site. So it doesn't give them that long-term security. So yes, it is a site that's available, but they want that long-term permanent security of a site that's not subject to any other potential use taking it over. But of course, that's a consideration for members to take and to weigh up. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Peter. Councillor James.
Thank you, Chairman. I find this really, really difficult, having had the Longmoor site in my patch for the 16 years I was a councillor before, with no problems whatsoever. I know the land adjacent to the A3, everywhere along the Liphook to Petersfield bypass, there are millions and millions of places that could be compulsory purchase from the MOD with access everywhere and anywhere. Griggs Green off Hambarn roundabout, we stopped a sort of cemetery place there, but there's masses of land by the turf area. 2 garages built on the A3 by Ripsley. That's agricultural land. There are millions of places on that A3 from the M25 down to the M27 A3M that could be used that are not in such a contentious place. And I mean, when the MOD move from Longmoor, that is the time to then permanently secure a site when the MOD move. You know, certainly from the site where the salt bit is, you know, I know that bit really well, where the old railway line is, and they could ship salt on the railway line. And to the right-hand side, I just cannot believe I'm looking at it. So unfortunately, because I do believe, and I know masses of land either side, and none of those people have even been approached near the Hambarn roundabout to whether they'd like to have access to fields and stuff that are there. I don't think at this moment that I could support it, because it's not needed at this very moment. When the time comes that they might need it, then, and there is nowhere else, then I would probably have to support it. But at the moment, I don't think that there is a need or a requirement at the moment. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor James. Officers, did you wish to respond at this stage, or no?
No, thank you, Chairman.
Okay.
We'll wait for further discussion.
Thank you. Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Chairman. I have great sympathy with actually what Councillor James has said. I agree that we need a salt depot near the A3. We'd like it very close to the tunnel because there have been problems in the past. But I'm not convinced this is the best place for it. It's down a very small, narrow, windy 1 mile track, as has been said. It is in A and B green belt. And reading the report and 1 or 2 comments from the officers, it seems as if the applicants have purchased this place and they're hell-bent to try and turn it into a salt depot without actually considering are there better alternatives available. Now, they may be more expensive, but we shouldn't put a price on saving our A and B green belt and having the right salt place in a suitable location. I think there are probably many other places that could be examined, and I'd like to see, before I would approve this or indicate approval of this, I'd like to see a thorough examination of potential other sites, because I don't think that's in front of me here, and for those reasons I don't think I could support the application today.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Councillor Upton.
Chairman, I agree with the last speaker. I don't feel there's been sufficient exploration of other sites. And may I just ask, is this site only been considered because it is in the ownership of the applicant?
Officers?
Thank you, Chairman. Well, of course, it is in the ownership of the applicant, but it's a site they've put forward. They've also put forward some comments about, there's a comment about compulsory purchase and things like that, but there is a cost to that, and it's a site that is available and they deem suitable and an appropriate location in terms of the strategic network. So I suppose the answer to your question is yes. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Bolton first.
Thank you, Chairman. To me, the crucial thing is at the bottom of page 40, the fact that very special circumstances must exist to outweigh the harm to the green belt and any other harm. And among the list of very special circumstances, to me, the only one that seems to be very special is possibly A. I can accept that, yes, if we had a rapid response to providing winter maintenance facilities, activities, that would be very special. But what I really doubt is how often it will actually be used. Do we really have, yes, occasionally we have very cold winters, but last winter wasn't very cold, it was very wet. And somehow I just come to the conclusion there are no adequate, very special circumstances. And because the development is harmful to the green belt, therefore I must conclude I cannot support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. Councillor Tom Martin.
Thank you. I suspect I'm in the minority this evening, but I do support the officer's recommendations for this report. A few people have said that we should be looking at other alternatives, but at the end of the day, we are looking at the proposal that's in front of us, and it's not. We have the proposal in front of us. That's the application that we're commenting on. We're not here to look at alternatives to that site. If we get an application for a new dwelling, we don't start saying, well, actually, it would be better if it was over there rather than in this space. At the end of the day, the application before us is for this space. People have said that Longmoor is the better option, and that we should be looking at this when that's no longer available. But I suspect when Longmoor is no longer available, the time will be too late to find an alternative. And I think the applicant is seeking security. And I understand that. Also on page 13, the Surrey Hills AOMB advisor, my reading of this seems to suggest that this proposal is acceptable. This is replacing two existing buildings. I suspect that what is proposed will not be too dissimilar. We've seen the pictures of the elevations, and again, the AOMB advisor has suggested that it will likely blend in better over time. I think also this depot is, the time that this is going to be used is when it is cold and wet, and I suspect that other users of the area, walkers and so on, will probably be less likely to be using the roads. I appreciate what Councillor Bolton has said, that it doesn't necessarily get that cold, but actually all through the winter months we do see gritting lorries going up and down as precautionary measures, and I'd much rather they were gritting as a precautionary measure, such that when it does get really cold and the roads start freezing, we are protected. Once it's actually iced over, it's a little bit too late. So I've heard all the comments, and on balance, I do still agree with the officer's recommendations, and will be voting for this proposal.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Members, anybody else, any comments? I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I think that one of the most pertinent facts is that Highways England have stated in one of the application documents that, and I quote, if the current application is refused, the intention is to revisit the sites that were discounted previously, which suggests that there may well be alternative sites that would suit better than this and not come with all the inherent problems of this site. But I think if Councillor Else, would you like to respond to anything that you've heard in the discussion?
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I'd just like to say that I think that the effect on the people who live near this site is of paramount interest to me. It doesn't seem to me to be an urgent matter, as we've heard. There is no immediate need, and there is no pressure to move. Given that the MOD give notice, what are the odds of it being in the middle of a very severe winter? I mean, you know, there's too many ifs and buts and whys and wherefores when you consider the amount of pressure and unpleasantness and upset it's going to give to all the objectors. And I can fully understand and sympathise their feelings. I think that we have another problem which hasn't been mentioned unless it has already been solved, and that is the question of salt leach onto farmland. I don't know whether that's still an issue. That was a big concern for one of the farmers in particular who has his farm adjacent to this land, so I'd be interested to know if that has been solved. And I don't think it's good enough just to deny that it will happen. I think we need to hear, you know, that there are measures actually put in place to avoid that. All in all, I do feel that if people are minded to agree with the officers, I would urge a site visit, because I honestly don't believe that you can make an objective decision without seeing the actual site and understanding entirely the upset that it will cause. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you. Members, any last comments before... Oh, Councillor James.
Thank you, Chairman, for allowing me to come back. I have two things following on from Councillor Martin when he was saying that the Surrey Hills advisor thought that the new building would blend in better. But actually, on the following page, their very last line says that great weight has to be given to conserving the landscape, and there seems to be a very strong case for an AOB reason for refusal. That's their very last comment. But also, my concern is, if it's going to be returned to farmland, are we going to get an application for a new barn to replace the one that's there for agricultural purposes? So there'll be more intensification in that area. So I'm still undecided. But I just wanted to pick up on Councillor Martin's comments.
Thank you, officers. Did you want to respond?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I think Councillor James has already picked up on the point about the AMB officer, but it is, I mean, if you actually read their whole content, it's very much the balanced point of view. It does finish with that, but if you read further back and he talks about potentially it doesn't. And we think with the conditions we've applied regarding lighting, regarding types of use, regarding the materials, it wouldn't have an adverse impact, and we've weighed the sort of the benefits of that as required by 116 of the paragraph 116 of the MPPF, where you weigh the harm to the the harm to the AOMB. So yes, there's potential for some harm, but we don't think it's significant, and we think it's the harm would be outweighed by the benefit of the circumstances around this. There's a comment also from Councillor Mrs. Else about the salt leach. We've got a condition 7 on the agenda, which deals with that and requires a method for controlling that and to prevent any infiltration to the wider area. So we think that adequately covers that point. I think the local residents were mentioned again. Obviously, given the nature, it's been touched upon when it is used. It's likely to be winter months and not all the time, so it's not going to be an intensive use of the site. It will be as and when required. We've also put in a control, again, about lighting and again about beepers or reversing beepers and things like that to prevent that from impacting them when it's early mornings or late night or whenever they might be operating. You've also got to take account of it in terms of the noise. You are particularly close to the A3 in terms of a background noise as well to consider. But sort of overall, if I just sort of summarise on our position, that there is, of course, there could be other sites available, but we have got to consider this one and whether it's harmful, and weigh up those circumstances. So officers feel they have been looked at. We've got to consider the harm of this particular development. Alternative sites have been considered, but we feel this is suitable and they've been adequately addressed in the assessment in the officer's report. One other comment, so thank you, colleagues just point out, is the agricultural use and whether it might become more intensive. Obviously, it's not currently being used as a site. You've seen the pictures of the site; it's sort of slightly overgrown. It could become more use, and for an agricultural use, there's no control over that. So there could be vehicles coming and going at any time, and no restriction on the amount of those vehicles. And you can't judge whether they might come in for a larger building. There's a certain amount that can be done under permitted development agricultural use. So it's very difficult to foresee what might come forward. So hopefully that picks up on the points and comments raised. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Peter. Any last comments before we move to the recommendation? No, jolly good. So the recommendation is that subject to conditions 1, that's the amended condition 1, to 12 and additional condition 13 and informatives 1 to 3 as set out on pages 47 to 51 of the report, permission be granted. May I have those in favour of the recommendation to grant?
That's 2.
And those against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Any abstentions? Thank you, members. The recommendation to grant is rejected. We need a reason for refusal. We need to vote on the refusal, do we? Members, we need an alternative recommendation to refuse the application with some reasons. Councillor Bolton.
Something like the bottom of page 40, slightly reworded. We think there are inadequate very special circumstances to outweigh the harm to the development on the green belt.
Councillor Reynolds.
Well, I think I'd add just before that inappropriate development and therefore would be harmful to the green belt, and there are no special circumstances to outweigh the harm to the green belt. I think those are fairly decent, robust recommendations.
Thank you. Anybody else? Would officers, would those reasons be sufficient? Would you be happy to refuse on those grounds?
Thank you, Chairman. I've got some wording, if I might, just to recommend to officers, if that's okay.
Please.
So hopefully picks up on the points raised. So we're suggesting sort of effectively there'll be 4 sort of reasons. There'll be an in principle one on the green belt, and then a detailed one on the green belt, and then ones that pick up on the OMB and AGLV. So the first one, so the detailed green belt one, proposal by reason of its design, scale, appearance, some potential urbanising impact would cause material harm to the openness, natural beauty and character of the green belt and the OMB. And the Council is not satisfied that very special circumstances put forward, including evaluation of alternative sites, outweigh the harm to the green belt and other harm. The proposal is therefore contrary to policies C1 and C3 of the local plan, section 9 and paragraphs 115 and 116 of the MPPF. So that would be a first detailed one. We also need an overriding in principle greenbelt reason. So proposal conflicts with national and local plan policies regarding greenbelt set out in policy C1, the local plan and the national planning policy framework. There is a general presumption against inappropriate development and development which adversely affects the openness of the greenbelt. And that picks up on that point, and we picked up on the very special circumstance, the first one. And the third reason, the site lies within the Surrey Hills AONB, within which the area's distinctive landscape character and natural beauty is to be conserved and enhanced by virtue of a height, scale and design of the proposed building. And I propose we put in use as well there, if members are happy. Proposal is inconsistent with this aim and conflicts with the national strategic and local policy guidance advice set out in policy C3 and the national planning policy framework. And the fourth one, which is the same wording but relates to the area of great landscape, the site lies within the area of great landscape value within which the landscape should be conserved and enhanced. The same reasons by virtue of use, height, scale. The proposal is inconsistent with the aims of the local plan and the MPPF. So there's effectively 4 detailed reasons there that we need to pick up on if members consider that to be appropriate.
Thank you, Peter. That's very helpful. So, members, the revised recommendation is that subject to those reasons that Peter has just outlined, that permission be refused. All those in favour?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
And those against?
2.
Thank you, members. That revised recommendation is agreed. Thank you, members of the public. I expect a lot of you will be leaving us now. Right, members, we'll continue then. The next item is item A2, reference WA 2016-0790, land to the rear of 60 to 64 Turner Court, Oxford Road, Godalming. Tim, would you like to introduce the application to the committee, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Members, start off with site location. The site's located here, northwest of Oxford Road, which runs here in Godalming. There is some cared for accommodation here, known as Turner Court. So the site is accessed across the front car park at Turner Court, which comes down, and it's located here. This is an aerial photograph really just to show you where the site is. The site is currently largely as shown there, largely sort of overgrown vegetation. It's not had any built form on it. The application itself, the application is for erection of 2 detached dwellings. 2 4-bedroom dwellings are proposed. The details of the proposed dwellings are set out on page 55 of the agenda in terms of scale and design. The 2 proposed properties are here, numbers 1 and 2. Access would be taken from the existing access down the site here. The site is lower down than the properties which front Oxford Road, including Turner Court. It should be noted that they have a right of way across the existing car park, so vehicle access can be achieved. This is a refuse vehicle tracking plan. The proposal includes the provision for a private refuse collection service that they would use. This is a refuse vehicle tracking plan. The refuse vehicle would be smaller than the standard council-sized ones which serve properties in the borough. And so this has been submitted to demonstrate really just that the refuse vehicle could gain access down to the site and back up. This proposed elevation, so each proposed dwelling is the same. So there's one set of elevations for the 2 properties. In terms of design, slate roof tiles with facing brickwork and some render to the front. You'll note some dormer features and generally sort of traditional Surrey vernacular design. The rear of the properties would have a raised decking which would face the tree bank to the northwest. The proposed floor plans here, standard accommodation at ground floor level. There's the decking up here and 4 bedrooms in each proposed dwelling. This is just some colour elevations submitted with the application, just showing the 2 rear elevations of the proposed dwellings. Note carports on the sides, just to help put it in a little bit of context in terms of materials. Turning to site photographs themselves, some of the members went on the site visit early in the week, so they'll be familiar with this. This is currently the sort of access point start, you could say, before you get onto the right of way across Turner's Court car park. This is looking down here. The proposal includes block pave work to resurface here. Also 2 metre high fencing along here, which drops down to 1.5 metres about halfway, which is acoustic fencing to help reduce noise impacts on the existing residents, which is to the left as you see. This is the existing site. As I said earlier, it's undeveloped. It is within the settlement boundary, however. You'll note that they've done quite a lot of ecological work as part of the submission. I've got an update for you, which I'll go into a bit later. But clearly a lot of the vegetation here would be cleared. Some of these trees at the back here are actually not within the site, so they will be retained. So actually the tree backdrop would remain as is. Just to help show you where Turner's Court is from the site. So the site's on the left here. The boundary here for Turner's Court. This is the shared outdoor amenity space for Turner's Court, and you can just see the rear building comes across here. And again, this is looking back up the existing access road, just to help show you its width and put it in context. if I can turn members' attention prior to this to the update sheet, you'll note that the Wildlife Trust have submitted an additional letter in review of the applicant's additional Great Crested Newt survey report that they have looked at. You'll note that they're happy with the content of that and suggest they undertake the mitigation measures recommended. So on the back of that, we recommended condition 20, you'll see at the update sheet at the bottom there. One additional letter representation submitted. Condition 19 in the report should read condition 18. Hence, officers recommending additional conditions 19 and 20. Condition 19 is recommended following the site visit, where members queried the private refuse vehicle collection. And on the back of that, we have recommended a condition so that it is collected by that service only, such as to control that, because that is the nature of the application and the access down to the site that they have demonstrated. So in terms of the matters of judgment and determining issues for this application, the site is within the settlement area of Godalming, where in principle residential development can be acceptable. You'll note within the report and the comments from the Environment Agency that the site, according to the council records, was in flood zones 2 and 3. Before the application was submitted, they had done what's called a flood zone challenge with the Environment Agency, where they had challenged their modelling records that they had for the site, and the site has subsequently been taken out of flood zones 2 and 3, is now flood zone 1, which does also affect the principle of residential development on the site. Hence, that has been put into the principal and technical judgment section of this slide. So the matters remaining for members is design and visual amenity, impact on the residential amenity, and impact on the setting of heritage assets, which is particularly the list of buildings at Front Oxford Road and the conservation area. Overall, officers are satisfied that with the 2 dwellings proposed, that permission be granted. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Tim. This is a public speaking item, and I think you've all been made aware of the procedure. May I invite the opponent, Ryan Kelly, to speak. Good evening, Mr. Kelly. You have 4 minutes from when you begin speaking. It's the big one in the middle at the bottom. That's it.
Good evening. I represent the residents of Turner Court and the local residents of the area, all of whom have raised objections and none have supported. Some of these points are dependent on expert opinion, and decisions are only as good as the quality of the data supplied, and I believe some of the evidence should be checked. The change from Zone 3A to Zone 1 on flooding does not conform with reality. I visited the site on Christmas Day 2013, following the major flood that day. Vegetation was well bent over in the direction of flow of the river, indicating that there had been a water flow. Previously, this level of flood occurred in 1968, thereby being twice within 45 years. Regarding refuse, the proposal for private refuse collection could be seized at any time, requiring a public service over a track which officer opinion on 12th of April 2013 said was not possible. Blockages in the narrow route through the car park will be a constant source of future conflict. The track designation, the track appears to be shown as a pedestrian access on old maps along the rear of the gardens of the historic houses and over the bridge. Is the unilateral redesignation of this track as a vehicular access lawful, and has this been researched? Regarding the track safety, the bearing strength of the track where it passes Turner Court Garden does not appear to have been checked. A simple topping, even if well laid, does not guarantee that the banking into Turner Court Garden will not collapse under heavy loading, with possible serious consequences. There is no consideration of adverse weather conditions on what is a very steep slope. Regarding pedestrian safety, there is no space to provide any safe footpath along the track when surfaced. The single track accommodates the main pedestrian access to 66 Oxford Road at the top and the pedestrian exit from the rear of Turner Court used in a fire alarm situation. Serious consideration of safety is omitted. Load bearing of the Turner Court car park construction in respect of safety in rooms underneath is not known. Regarding the impact on residential amenity, the proposed fence would not mitigate the effects of the intensification of the use of this track and would interfere with wildlife movement. Surrey County Council sought to spotlight concern for Godalming in the sale particulars of the land in 1996 by stating Waverley policy RE2 states that there is a strong presumption against any form of development. I believe this should still apply. The residential amenity will be substantially degraded, with particular reference to Oxford Road Conservation Area and the listed buildings. But the overriding concern in all the deliberations must be for the safety of the tenants of Turner Court, all of whom have learning disabilities. These tenants use the car park as recreational space and having learning disabilities means they will not always respond to what might be considered in a normal way. I would contend that the absence of comment is a consequence of limited knowledge of people with learning disabilities. The community must safeguard its vulnerable people.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Now, may I invite the supporter, Andrew Munton, to speak, please. Good evening, Mr. Munton. You have 4 minutes from when you begin speaking.
Chairman, councillors, thank you for giving me this opportunity to address you this evening. Reside Developments is a local quality house builder which is demonstrated by us being awarded the Civic Design Award around 3 years ago for a scheme of ours at Tanner's Mews in Farncombe. Overall, the scheme has been reduced from an application that was submitted a couple of years ago from 2 to 3 units. Access to the site was not objected to either last time or this time by Highways Authority. The traffic movements be very low from the two dwellings and imperceptible at the road access exit onto Oxford Road itself. As the committee report sets out, we reviewed the flooding position over the last year, noting that we do not believe that the site visibly had flooded in the past. Our consultants, RSK, submitted data to the Environment Agency where they have agreed that the site does not in fact flood and the site was therefore now within flood zone 1 where residential development is considered acceptable. We reviewed the site's relationship with the neighbouring properties and incorporated acoustic, soundproof fencing and quiet servicing materials for the access road. We'd also note that the dwellings are more than the usual minimal acceptable distances from neighbouring properties. We worked very closely with your heritage, design and planning officers at the council to produce a well-considered layout and elevations that both fit in with its immediate landscape and also the adjoining conservation area. The street scene on Oxford Road would be unaffected by this proposal. This will retain the visual appearance of the conservation area. The scheme will be served by a private refuse company. This will both ensure that the bins will not be left on the roadside, littering the street and the conservation area, and also will overcome concerns addressing the access to the site, as the company has a small vehicle which can access and manoeuvre within this site. The scheme is in excess of the nationally described space standards and fully complies with county and Waverley parking standards. It does not cause any harm to the biodiversity on the site and can safely access the highway network as I set out previously. Just in terms of the access, there is a vehicular right-of-way across the car park, and I'm sure that any new residents, should this planning application be approved, will work with the owner's residents on days where any blockages may occur. I mean, we totally understand the residents that are there and the issues that could arise. But we are only talking about a very small number of cars, potential cars coming and going, and I'm sure this happens on a lot of roads where vehicles, ambulances, police cars need to park from time to time, and I'm sure that'll be understood by both parties. I therefore don't believe that there was the great clash that's being perceived. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Munton. Members, I open it up to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wasn't able to go on the official site visit, so I took myself along last Friday. And it took me 2 goes to find the place in the first instance. But I was amazed because it seemed a relatively small parking area in Turner's Court. And actually, when I was there, somebody had actually parked in the access to this driveway. So I had to park in the Turner Court bit, and then I walked myself round. But getting out was also difficult. There's no way you're going to reverse onto Oxford Road, so you have to do a lovely shenanigan to turn round and get out again, because it is a very convoluted turning. And it seemed to me it was a very long driveway. There might only be a few cars, but they've got to make sure that they can see each other before they start off, because there's no room for a passing place. And there's no way that the person coming in can reverse and let the other one out. I just can't see how it would work. I have nothing against the buildings. To me, they look quite pleasant, but apart from beam me up, Scotty, I'm not sure how they're going to make it in. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wheatley. Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of queries, perhaps, to council officers. One of the photographs you showed seemed to have a blue bin on the track. That's it. That bin presumably belongs to the houses on the left. If the residents there are used to putting their bins on that track, then nothing will get past without damage. And the second question was, does the private arrangement to take away waste, does that also apply to everything, blue bins, brown bins, food waste? Does it apply to all the recycling? And how can we guarantee that this will continue ad in forever? What if the private firm just goes bust? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. I have to say I was at the site meeting on Monday morning and the bin wasn't there at that time. So I think that was probably just unfortunate when that photograph was taken. It didn't look as if anything was left there on a permanent basis. But perhaps, Tim, you'd like to address the refuse collection.
With respect, good citizens put their bins out on the evening before the collection day, so it would be there overnight.
But with respect, the refuse collection people aren't going to wander off down a grass track to get their bin from them, are they? So, Tim, would you like to address the refuse collection?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor. As far as we're concerned, they do have a right of access across here. Also, as far as we're aware as well, that some people here in these properties also have that right of access as well. Hence, an old garage building is here, and hence they put their bins out on here. And so really with the right of access, from our point of view, it would end up potentially being a civil matter if they decided to leave them there or block the path. And that would be a matter not for the council to get involved with, should permission be granted this evening. The refuse and recycling, the private refuse collection, as far as I'm aware, it is refuse and recycling. And we have added that condition in the update sheet, as the point was made on the site visit, similar to yours, about, well, if they just go ahead and build them and then sit back and rely on Waverley to collect the bins, then there's going to be an issue. So we have put the condition on that they can't vary that, or they have to apply to us to remove that condition or vary it in the future. So I hope that helps.
Do I understand, though, that it would be impossible for a Waverley refuse lorry truck to get down and back again because Waverley lorries are bigger?
Yes, as far as we're concerned, so the Waverley lorries are bigger, and the tracking plan that they've submitted is on a smaller lorry to the standard size Waverley one.
Okay, Councillor Upton and then Councillor Peter Martin.
Thank you, Chairman. May I inquire that access at the moment that you just stated, that other tenants or other owners' properties there have right of way through it as well, and is that used as a facility to get into the woodland, which is to the back of the proposed site? And is it the only access to those woodlands of that area to allow? Is it used generally, other than just for this particular site?
Thank you. Officers, have you a response to that?
Thank you, Chairman. Unfortunately, I can't confirm that. I don't know, unfortunately, Councillor, on that question.
Yes, of course.
Sorry, it looks to be in the curtilage of the woods. It disappears in this particular picture.
Tim, do you want to come back?
Thank you, Chairman. I was only going to say, I mean, if you look at that, if they've got a right of access, it would actually be maintained, because where the houses have been built, if you look on that, they'd still be able to get through. We don't have the specific details of whether they've got access rights to that, but of course it wouldn't be blocked, and there'd be a driveway and improved surface anyway to get through if that was required.
Thank you. I'm just worried that it's an existing and time-honoured path that's been used in the past, that was all.
Anybody else like to comment? Oh, sorry, Councillor Peter Martin.
Thank you. I wasn't able to go on the site visit on Monday, but I do know the site well. And I indeed am long enough in the tooth to remember the application for Turner Court, to which there was a deal of objection, as I recall, at the time of its application, both the design and being built into the side of the hill and so on and so forth. I mean, for me, there are three concerns. Firstly, the location low in the valley. Secondly, the access. And thirdly, the possible impact on visual amenity. In terms of being low in the valley, it seems to me that it would not be, these houses would not be the only ones in such a position. Further to the north, there's Oxford Court, a block of flats which you can see just see the part of in the picture there. Further to the south, there is Headley Lodge and Oxford Mill, of course, itself, and then further upstream beyond that, there are 3 or 4 houses in Waterside Lane, which are in a similar position on the other side of the Oxford River or Oxford Stream, which are in a very similar position. So whilst it's a concern, I don't think it's clearly been rated as flood zone 1 now, and it's not without, there are other houses and buildings in a similar situation. So I think I would be okay as far as that's concerned. The access is a different concern. It's clearly not a good access, but we know of lots of properties where access isn't good, and you need to, if we're going to accept it, then we have to accept the mitigation measures that go along with that, and the refuse is clearly an important part, and I'm reasonably satisfied on that score. I can understand entirely the concerns of of Turner Court as far as this is concerned. And I can understand entirely they'd rather not have people across there, but the fact of the matter is there is a right-of-way that exists, and Turner Court was built knowing that there was a right-of-way across there, albeit with no then access needed by anybody to buildings below. So I'm not altogether happy with the access. It's not a good access, but for me, I don't think it's that is sufficiently strong for me to turn the application down. And indeed, the people who would be most affected would be the people who are going to purchase the houses, who would be able to clearly see the difficulties of access. So that there's no surprise there. My main concern will be the impact on those at Turner Court, but on the other hand, Turner Court was built with the knowledge that that right-of-way existed. And then there's of course some impact on visual amenity, although there's no impact on the street scene itself. You can see the houses presumably to a degree from Turner Court, but on the other hand, there are the houses to the right-hand side in Oxford Road. If you go back to the previous, there we are. There are two houses slightly north and west, which are very low, again, down into the valley. They're not at the same height as Turner Court. They're much lower down, and there is, clearly you can see those, and in a way you will have that sort of same impact, and looking onto the roofs of these new buildings, albeit there's a great deal of vegetation and tree growth which will mitigate that. So again, not entirely ideal. So I mean, for me, this is a bit marginal. I'm not altogether happy, but I think on balance I would go along with the officers, and I will support the officers' recommendation to grant approval.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Any other comments from the members before we move to the recommendation? Right, okay, so the recommendation is that subject to conditions 1 to 18 and informatives 1 to 12 as set out on pages 83 to 92 of the report, plus additional conditions 19 to 20 as set out on the update sheet, permission be granted. May I have those in favour of the recommendation to grant?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
And those against?
2.
Any abstentions? No. Thank you, members. The recommendation to grant is agreed. Moving on, the next item is... Just let me go. The next item is item B1, and I believe that the recommendation has been changed to a refusal owing to we haven't received yet. Have I got the right application? Look at me as if I'm mad. We're waiting for a further ecological report, but rather than a refusal, I understand that Councillor Holder would like to propose a deferral. Councillor Holder, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. This application has been put to the Parish Council for consultation over a period of time. The Parish Council have put various amendments, including the design of the buildings to include, I think, dormer windows over the bathroom and the corridors. They reduced the amount of buildings from 6 to 5, despite the fact that on page 93 it does say 6 dwellings. It is in fact 5 dwellings. And I think it's extremely unreasonable that we should refuse this application purely because the environment haven't been able to complete a BAT survey in time. I would like to defer the application for a period to allow the ecological survey to be finished, which will be probably by the 27th of September, and then we'll have a better idea of how to assess this application. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Holder. Councillor James.
Councillor Chairman, I would like to second that motion to defer.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, members, the proposition is that we defer Sorry, Councillor Bolton, did you wish to speak?
If I may, Chairman, could I just request that officers remove any ambiguities about the numbers? It was confusing when I read the report.
I'm sure they've taken due note of that. Members, the proposal is that we defer this, the consideration of this application until our next Central Planning Committee meeting. Can I have all those in favour, please?
That's 1, 2, 3.
That's unanimous.
Yeah, that's unanimous.
That's unanimous. Jolly good. Thank you very much. Well, at this stage, I would like to take my leave and invite Councillor Tom Martin to take the chair for the rest of the meeting. Thank you and good night.
Okay, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. This is now item B2, WA 2016-1388 for 7 Richmond Road, Godalming, GU7282ET. Who's introducing this application? Tim.
Thank you, Chairman. Some of the site location, looking to the northwest of Richmond Road. Site comprises a 2-storey semi-detached dwelling. You can see the character of the area is somewhat residential. Just to the proposal itself, it is for a single-storey rear extension. The depth is 5.4 metres, width of 3.7 metres. You see the design is somewhat of a orangery design with flat roof with a lantern in the central position. You can just make out here the proposed floor plan. Essentially would infill this gap here, but also extend slightly beyond and slightly wrap around the existing extension on the property. So if you can imagine it's coming out here. You'll note the neighbour has an extension already, and so officers are satisfied with the depth coming across here. Design is at the rear of the property, with visual impact is fairly limited. So overall, officers are satisfied that the visual amenity and residential amenity has been addressed, and the scheme is suitable, so recommend permission be granted. Thank you, Chairman.
Members, Councillor Reynolds.
It's in my ward, it's at the back, it looks very nice, I propose no objection.
Okay, we need to do this properly. We have... okay, if we can move the recommendation that subject to conditions 1 to 3 and informatives 1 to 3 are set out pages 142 to 143 of the report. Is permission granted?
That's unanimous.